Vance uttered 8 exact words to Nancy Pelosi. Only 8. She parted her lips, yet not a single sound emerged. Subsequently, she executed an action she had not performed during her 4 decades in Washington. She seized her documents, rose to her feet, and departed the room. There was no rebuttal and no justification. Furthermore, during that evening, not a solitary Democrat offered any statement to defend her. Not a single person. The contents within that crimson folder dismantled it all, beginning with a solitary figure, 838%. That represents the astronomical growth of one household's investment portfolio over a decade, whereas the broader market merely expanded by 256%. No Wall Street hedge fund has ever equaled that performance. And the individual orchestrating these transactions did not trade assets as a profession. She authored the very legislation that all market participants are obligated to follow. Pelosi entered Dirksen 138 and positioned her microphone. Opposite her, Vance was seated with a shut crimson folder resting before him. He remained silent, prompting her to initiate the dialogue. "Senator," she began, her tone projecting the practiced cordiality of a woman welcoming a subordinate at a social gathering. "I was occupying spaces just like this while you were still in Ohio drafting your memoir. I have given testimony more times than we could possibly tally. Thus, let us not feign that this session will be arduous for me, or for either of us." Vance gave a slow, single nod, as if acknowledging she had presented a completely valid argument. 838%, he stated. "That is the figure I constantly return to. I reviewed it 3 distinct times because initially I was convinced I had misread it." "This is public data," Pelosi countered, gesturing slightly with her hand. "Every individual disclosure is accessible to any citizen possessing a computer and 5 spare minutes." "It truly is," Vance concurred. He extended his hand to the adjacent chair and retrieved a crimson folder. He situated it on the desk before him, aligned its corners meticulously with 2 fingers, and kept it shut. "Contained herein is a specific day, a day in September, a solitary transaction. We will address it before we conclude, but I intend to approach it gradually, because taking the measured path is the sole method for someone to truly comprehend the significance of that day." Pelosi's gaze lowered to the crimson file, then returned to his visage. Her smirk remained entirely rigid. "I do not engage in stock trading, Senator," she declared. "My spouse does. I trust you are already aware of that. I trust every individual present is aware of that." "I am aware that is your claim," Vance replied. He refrained from opening the file. He allowed it to remain positioned on the table, separating them, a stark red contrast against the dark, glossy timber, and the recording device at the rear of the chamber remained focused upon it well after he had averted his own gaze. "Let us commence with one particular year," Vance proposed. 2024. During that singular year, your household's investments yielded 70.9%. In that exact time frame, the overall market yielded 24.9%. Therefore, in a span of 12 months, you outperformed the market 3-fold. Is that figure correct? If that is what the disclosures indicate, then that is what the disclosures indicate. Pelosi clasped her hands atop the desk. "I do not spend my time committing percentages to memory, Senator. I have a nation to assist in governing. Allow me to articulate what that figure implies," he stated, and he let the statement resonate independently, akin to a man dropping a burdensome weight. That is not merely a successful year. A successful year occurs when you exceed the market average by 2 or perhaps 3 percentage points, and you consider yourself fortunate. That is not fortune. That represents the caliber of a year that does not materialize coincidentally. Somewhere across this nation tonight, a factory worker who labored on an assembly line for 3 decades examined his retirement fund during that exact year, noticed it had risen by 4%, and felt appreciative. 4%. You generated 70. He received the market standard. You received something entirely different. Pelosi elevated her chin. Upon responding, her tone possessed the sharp, rehearsed quality of a woman who had anticipated this precise inquiry. "Allow me to be exceptionally unambiguous, seeing as you appear resolute in circumventing the issue. Every solitary transaction my household has ever executed was disclosed publicly within a 4-5-day window, precisely as mandated by law. Nothing concealed, nothing clandestine. All of it transparently available for any citizen in this nation to review. Therefore, let me inquire directly, Senator, what exactly are you operating under the assumption you are charging me with?" It was a robust retort. It was the retort of a woman who had delivered those exact phrases numerous times in numerous identical chambers, having witnessed them succeed on every occasion. And for a brief period, it dominated the space, creating the impression she had already terminated the dialogue. Then Vance addressed it delicately, in the manner one handles an object someone has passed to them. He rotated it and displayed the reverse side to the chamber. "I am not charging you with violating the law," he clarified. "That is the aspect nearly everyone misunderstands. I trust you when you assert every transaction was permissible. I am not present to question why you circumvented the regulations. I am present to question why the regulations were constructed in a manner that enabled you to outperform the market by 46 percentage points in a solitary year, despite you being one of the specific individuals who drafted those very regulations." He permitted that to resonate before proceeding, because here is the reality of what that disparity truly represents. It is not merely a digit on a document. Every percentage point your household ascended beyond the market average was extracted from another source. It was extracted from the retirement savings of an educator in Dayton who invested her funds in an index portfolio and hoped it would endure. It was extracted from the pension of a metal worker who dedicated 30 years to a factory floor, believing the market operated identically for him as it did for the individuals within this structure. It was extracted from a healthcare worker's 401k, not merely one of them, millions of them. They all participated in the identical system you participated in. They were simply never dealt your hand of cards. Pelosi remained silent for a beat. The quietude elongated. "That is an incredibly poignant monologue," she finally remarked, and the cordiality had vanished from her tone. "It bears absolutely zero relevance to me." "Let us determine that," Vance countered. Vance unsealed a slender folder, distinct from the crimson one, and peered downward. "In December of 2022, your family's investment portfolio shifted into massive semiconductor holdings, specifically into a corporation named Nvidia, among others. And subsequently, merely weeks later, the legislative body you directed conducted a vote on legislation that dictated the entire trajectory of the domestic semiconductor sector. Chips, subsidies, billions in federal capital directed immediately toward the precise industry your household had just concluded investing in. My spouse administers the investments," Pelosi reiterated. "I do not monitor those transactions. I do not sit before a monitor and initiate the trades. He oversees all of it. That is the manner in which it has perpetually functioned within our family." Vance declined to debate her. He did not elevate his volume, nor did he incline forward across the desk. He merely jotted something down, a solitary sentence on the amber notepad before him, permitting her to observe him writing it. He was not combating her. He was accumulating her. Each time she grasped for the identical defense mechanism and brandished it, he accepted the phrases she offered, placed them cautiously aside, and preserved them, and she remained oblivious that she was supplying him, component by component, the exact ammunition he planned to deploy subsequently. "I comprehend," he acknowledged. "Your spouse oversees it. You do not monitor it. I merely wish to ensure I have captured that flawlessly for the official transcript. You have captured it flawlessly." "Excellent," Vance murmured very softly. "That is significant. That is going to prove more significant than you realize." He gazed down at his documentation for an extended period. Upon speaking anew, his pitch had descended further, the acute edge completely dissipating, leaving a cadence slower and more profound than his prior remarks. "My mother labored her entire existence in Ohio. She saved a fraction whenever possible. By the time she was prepared to retire, inflation had eroded the majority of it to practically zero. She participated in the exact same market you did. She simply was never permitted inside the chamber where the determinations were finalized." The committee room fell silent. No individual recorded anything. For an extended duration, no one within Dirksen 138 uttered a single phrase. Vance shut the slender file and pushed it away. When he resumed speaking, he did not introduce a fresh statistic. He altered the foundation beneath her. "I wish to transport you back to the spring of 2020. He declared. "Not regarding a transaction, but a specific week. Do you recall that spring?" "I recall the entirety of it," Pelosi affirmed. "It was a horrific era for this nation. It indeed was. Allow me to describe how that week appeared to the citizens observing this proceeding right now. There were queues outside the community pantries that wrapped around the block and extended down the subsequent street. Individuals waited in those queues for hours inside their vehicles, with their offspring in the rear seats, anticipating a carton of provisions. Independent enterprises that had operated for 4 decades were shutting their facilities permanently. And the Paycheck Protection Initiative, the singular lifeline maintaining operations for countless small storefronts, had just depleted its funding. "I am acutely conscious of what that spring entailed," Pelosi asserted. "I endured it within this very structure." "You certainly did," Vance acknowledged. "And during that exact week, you appeared on a late-night broadcast from your residence, and you revealed your freezer to the audience, a $24,000 appliance brimming with artisanal ice cream priced at $13 per carton. And you beamed, and you discussed how you were navigating the difficult period. For the initial instance that morning, a flicker of emotion crossed Pelosi's visage before she suppressed it and masked it. That was a moment of humanity, she insisted, that was edited, truncated, and weaponized by individuals exactly like yourself. Everyone discovered their personal, minor method to navigate that spring. Mine happened to incorporate ice cream. I offer no apologies for being a mortal on a broadcast. It was, once more, a genuine response. It contained validity. An individual is permitted a human moment, and Vance refrained from targeting the frozen dessert. He bypassed it completely. He reached beyond it to the core issue beneath, to the phrases she had articulated publicly. "I am not concerned with the appliance," he noted. "The appliance is irrelevant. The crux of the matter is what you labeled as relief. During that identical year, when the disbursements were ultimately distributed to households that had forfeited everything, the $600 disbursements, you stood on the legislative floor and you designated that amount as significant. $600. Significant. And 2 years prior to that, when laboring households received $1,200 back from a taxation reduction, you stood in virtually the identical location and you dismissed that sum as crumb." He allowed the contrasting terms to linger adjacent to each other in the atmosphere. Crumbs when it originated from the opposing faction. Significant when it originated from your identical family sitting at the dining table. Identical $600. The solitary variable that altered was whose signature was attached to it. "You are contorting decades of background into a soundbite," Pelosi protested, though her cadence had accelerated slightly. "Then permit me to untangle it," Vance proposed. "Permit me to explain who those crumbs belong to. They belong to the household that lost the eatery they had managed for 2 generations and required that disbursement to pay the final month's lease on a structure they no longer operated a business within. They belong to the former serviceman who remained on hold with the unemployment agency for 6 hours, only to be instructed to dial back the following day. They belong to the unmarried mother who calculated the finances at her dining table at midnight, $600 versus the pile of invoices, and realized it was insufficient. To you, delivering a speech on that floor, it was merely a figure. To them, it represented the entire month. The chamber had grown exceptionally quiet. "You possess no comprehension of what those citizens' existences were like," Pelosi countered. "I was raised in one of those existences," Vance replied. "That constitutes the disparity between us. You perused reports concerning them in a dossier. I consumed dinner in one of them." Pelosi's hand shifted. She extended toward the tumbler of water before her, enveloped her fingers around the glass, and subsequently refrained from hoisting it. She left it resting there, grasped but unconsumed, and after a moment, she released it. Then she transitioned to the offensive, her pitch escalating in tandem. "You wish to discuss candor, Senator? You authored a complete publication, a highly successful publication, disparaging the exact demographic that elevated you to your current position, the citizens of your own birthplace, your own relatives. You forged a profession out of critiquing your own faction, and now you occupy that seat and lecture me regarding moral principles." For a brief span, the room pivoted to observe him. It represented the most forceful counterattack she had launched the entire morning. Vance did not recoil. He did not refute it. He absorbed the strike and subsequently collected it, in the identical manner he had collected everything prior, transforming it into the precise weapon she wished to avoid. "Yes," he affirmed plainly. "I did. I authored it concerning my own demographic. I critiqued them when I deemed they were incorrect, and I executed it with my name displayed on the exterior, where any individual could locate it and utilize it against me." He hesitated. "You have occupied public office for nearly 4 decades. Identify one instance where you replicated that. One instance where you publicly informed your own faction they were incorrect, at a moment when it demanded a genuine sacrifice from you." Pelosi parted her lips. Not a single sound emerged. Vance's subsequent words were the briefest he had uttered thus far. "That is what I presume." Vance permitted the quietude to linger a fraction longer. Then he shifted to the final segment of the argument, representing the most precipitous terrain of the morning. For an extended period, he noted, there was an exceedingly straightforward proposal presented before you, a prohibition. Legislative representatives and their partners would be perpetually barred from trading distinct equities while occupying their positions, ceasing the purchase and liquidation of shares in the exact entities you were formulating legislation to govern. A singular, unambiguous boundary. And for years, at every juncture, you opposed it. That represents a severe oversimplification of a genuinely intricate issue, Pelosi argued. And you are aware of that. You labeled it an issue of liberty, Vance corrected. Those were your exact phrases, not mine. You argued that legislative representatives should possess the liberty to engage in the market equivalently to any other citizen of America. You stated it for the official record. You stated it repeatedly. You stated it for years while that prohibition languished on a docket, awaiting a ballot that you refused to authorize on the floor. I have perpetually prioritized transparency above restriction, Pelosi declared. Revelation, not prohibitions. That has remained my unwavering stance throughout my entire professional life, and I maintain it. It remained your stance, Vance concurred, right until the instant it ceased to be. And this is the segment I want the entire nation to comprehend with absolute clarity. You did not alter your perspective midway through your career, back when modifying it would have inflicted a tangible penalty upon you. You did not alter it when you still possessed years of transactions ahead of you. You altered it at the absolute conclusion, during your ultimate term in office, after the investments had already expanded from $30 million to $278 million. You backtracked at the exact instant the contest was definitively concluded, and there remained zero assets on the board for you to forfeit. I progressed my stance over time, Pelosi countered. That is what considerate individuals do, Senator. They absorb knowledge, they develop, they progress. The term suspended there in the atmosphere, fragile and unsubstantial. You did not progress, Vance refuted. His tone was subdued now, almost tender, which paradoxically rendered it more devastating. You were concluded. There exists a distinction, and I believe you recognize it. An individual progresses when they modify themselves while the modification still exacts a toll. You delayed until you had already harvested everything available to harvest, and subsequently, you relinquished the entity you no longer possessed any utility for, demanding the nation stand up and applaud it as development. A dynamic within the chamber altered, a certain atmospheric tension, and Pelosi perceived it pressing against her. She reached backward past all preceding arguments for the most ancient defense mechanism in her arsenal, the exact one she had carried into the chamber initially. My spouse executes the transactions, she repeated. I have already informed you of this repeatedly. I do not monitor them. I do not execute them personally. I am ignorant of the granular specifics. She recognized it even as it escaped her lips. Every occupant in the chamber recognized it. It was the fourth instance now. It had proven effective the initial time she utilized it, deteriorated the second time, and by this fourth iteration, it was a garment entirely stripped of fabric. Yet she continued elevating it against the chill, praying nobody could peer through it. Her hand drifted toward the water tumbler once more. On this occasion, she refrained from even wrapping her fingers around it. Her gaze shifted instead to the crimson folder resting on the desk before Vance, the one he had placed there nearly an hour prior without ever opening, and there her gaze remained fixed. Vance observed precisely where her attention was directed. You have been observing that folder since the instant I placed it down, he observed. So let us cease feigning it is not the catalyst for both of us being present this morning. He rested two fingers horizontally atop it. He still refrained from opening it. I guaranteed you a day, a specific day in September, one singular transaction, but prior to revealing it to you, I intend to pose one final inquiry, and I require you to address it unambiguously for the recording device, ensuring zero ambiguity exists subsequently regarding your statement and the precise timing of your statement. He gazed at her and delayed until she returned his gaze to be absolutely resolute for the transcript, before this committee, and before the nation. You are providing testimony that you possessed zero awareness of your household's transactions, that you did not monitor them, that you were ignorant of what assets were being purchased or liquidated, or the timing of any of it. Does that constitute your testimony? The chamber waited. Pelosi had been trapped previously. She had dedicated 40 years to chambers identical to this, internalizing the most fundamental principle they impart. When you find yourself trapped, you never withdraw. You project confidence. You articulate the statement more forcefully, lock eyes with your opponent, and challenge them to substantiate the contrary. It operated as an instinct now, more primal and swift than conscious reasoning. "That is accurate," she confirmed. She pronounced it resolutely. She pivoted her head, staring directly into the lens at the rear of the chamber as she declared it. "I did not monitor the transactions. I was unaware of the specifics. My spouse managed our family's portfolio in the manner he perpetually has. That represents the factual reality, Senator. It has continuously represented the factual reality." Vance nodded deliberately. He possessed what he required. She had just surrendered the ultimate component on video, using her own voice, utilizing her own vocabulary, completely oblivious that the snare had already secured itself soundlessly behind her. "I appreciate that," he acknowledged. "I needed to be absolutely certain." His palm rested flush against the file. Vance unsealed the folder. He did not extract a voluminous pile of documents. He withdrew a solitary sheet and rotated it so the recording device at the rear of the chamber could capture it. And subsequently, he commenced speaking, his phrasing becoming progressively condensed until practically nothing remained except the raw data. "September," he announced. "Your spouse liquidated a massive holding in Visa, an exceptionally massive one. The document is located right here in my grasp." And subsequently, exactly 1 day following, a singular day, the Justice Department publicized a monumental federal litigation targeting Visa. The equity plummeted, yet your household had already exited the position. 1 day prior to the event, not a week prior, not a month prior, one singular day. He placed the document down upon the desk. Now, let us return to December of 2022. Nvidia, the semiconductor holdings we previously discussed, acquired immediately prior to the legislative body you directed conducting its ballot on the legislation that funneled billions in federal capital directly into the semiconductor sector. Observe the two instances concurrently. Visa liquidated 1 day preceding the litigation. Nvidia acquired immediately preceding the ballot. 2 distinct years, 2 distinct corporations. The identical recurring sequence. Every solitary instance, your household remained one distinct maneuver ahead of data that the broader populace did not yet possess. The terms he had subtly established an hour prior resurfaced now, arriving simultaneously. Visa, September. Nvidia, the ballot. They had been residing in the chamber the whole time, minor and unjustified, deposited and ignored, and currently they coalesced in a singular action, bringing the entire structure of the situation into sharp clarity for every individual tuning in. And merely 2 minutes prior, Vance noted, on video, using your own voice, you declared to this entire nation that you possessed zero awareness of any of these events. He permitted that to resonate for a second. Consequently, there remain solely 2 viable explanations within this chamber. Either you were completely ignorant, and your household, through sheer unadulterated fortune, exited Visa exactly 1 day preceding a federal litigation and entered Nvidia exactly preceding your own ballot, repeatedly for years, demonstrating a precision that no living professional investor has ever duplicated, or you were aware, and you merely lied to the nation under oath, on the official transcript claiming you were not. Pelosi's jaw slackened, and for the initial instance that entire morning, not a single phrase escaped it. Not a rehearsed phrase, not a seamless pivot, not a solitary syllable. Vance refrained from elevating his volume for his concluding remark. He executed the inverse. He subdued it, 8 words, level and silent, radiating all the way to the posterior wall of the chamber. They lost everything. You knew the day before. The chamber did not explode. It executed the precise inverse. It lapsed into absolute silence. The specific variety of silence that carries palpable mass, the variety you can physically sense compressing your eardrums. No individual recorded anything. No individual murmured to their neighbor. The singular auditory element remaining within Dirksen 138 was the subtle electronic drone of the recording devices lining the wall. Pelosi remained exceptionally rigid. She refrained from reaching for the water tumbler on this occasion. She gazed downward at the desk, at the singular document positioned facing her, and she refrained from lifting it, and she offered no response because there remained no response in existence that the chamber would have accepted as truth. The committee head delayed. He afforded her the maximum duration one provides a testifier to answer. And subsequently, he delayed slightly longer than that because it had grown evident to every single individual in the chamber that the duration was no longer relevant, that no quantity of time would generate an answer. The testifier will, the committee head initiated, and subsequently paused because he was equally uncertain of how to conclude the phrase. Pelosi collected her leather portfolio. Her hands maintained steadiness, specifically the manner in which a person's hands remain steady when they are focusing intensely on ensuring they remain so. She avoided glancing at the recording device she had acknowledged throughout the morning. She stood from her seat, and in a chamber where she had dedicated almost 4 decades embodying numerous roles, yet never once being the initial person to depart, she was, on this particular morning, the initial person to depart. Vance did not observe her exit. He did not recline in his seat. He did not allow himself even the subtlest grin. He shut the crimson file, aligned its edges meticulously with 2 fingers precisely as he had done at the absolute beginning of the session, and rested both palms flat atop it. If you have ever rested in your living space observing the decades slip by, secretly suspecting that the individuals occupying the highest echelons were operating under a disparate set of regulations than those bestowed upon you, then cling to what you just witnessed because you were not fabricating any of it. You were correct the whole time. Forward this to an individual who perpetually sensed it instinctively and was never afforded the opportunity to witness the evidence presented on the table. The document remained precisely where it lay after she departed. September. One singular day. One singular transaction. The recording device focused upon it and refused to pan away. The footage was ubiquitous by that night. Not the entire session, merely the final 90 seconds. The solitary document, the 6 phrases, her standing from the seat and exiting a chamber she formerly dominated. It circulated across the nation in the manner only specific phenomena circulate, the ones that articulate an emotion individuals had harbored for years but had never managed to substantiate. And here is the sequence that did not follow. Nobody arrived to defend her. The companions who had remained by her side for decades, who had co-hosted her stages and her charity events, fell silent. Not a single one stepped before a lens to claim she had suffered unfair treatment. They had viewed the identical 90 seconds as the rest of the populace, performed the identical calculations, and desired zero association with standing adjacent to that document. The quietude surrounding her narrated its own tale, more resoundingly than any formal declaration could. Then arrived the segment that no file could remedy. For years she had obstructed the prohibition on congressional equity transactions. She had characterized it as an issue of liberty, and currently, during the concluding months of her tenure, the legislative body enacted it. 232 ballot, a restriction preventing legislative representatives from trading independent equities, extending to their partners, extending to their offspring. The singular policy she had repelled for years transformed into legislation during her exit, and it did not enact seamlessly. It enacted with her moniker affixed to it within the journalism, within the discourse, within the populace's consciousness. Her personal investments had morphed into the primary example. The singular, most scrutinized trading portfolio in the nation had morphed into the rationale the gateway was ultimately being sealed. She had dedicated $278 million constructing an empire, and not a solitary cent of it could purchase back what she forfeited that morning. Because this constitutes the element that endures. She participated in Washington politics for nearly 4 decades. She will secure a segment in the historical texts, and a significant portion of it will be factual, and a portion of it will be formidable. However, resting at the forefront of that segment now, superseding everything else, will be this: a legislation bearing her moniker. A legislation drafted to halt the precise activity she dedicated a profession to executing. She had agonized, as they all agonize, over her historical footprint, regarding how she would be memorialized post-mortem. And ultimately, her historical footprint morphed into a cautionary tale, a phrase within a government curriculum, a narrative a patriarch shares with his descendant regarding the era the nation ultimately apprehended one of them. That constitutes the penalty, not a monetary penalty, not a prison enclosure. Something more severe for an individual of her stature. Her moniker morphed into the warning against her own offense, passed down to the offspring who will inherit the nation she assisted in corrupting, and who will mature in a structure that became marginally more equitable due to the morning she exited that chamber. The nation observed all of it. That constitutes the element meriting reflection tonight. For years, you were labeled a cynic. You were labeled delusional. You were informed that the structure was equitable, that every individual operated under identical regulations, that the intuition in your gut was merely resentment masquerading as perception. And subsequently, one morning within a hushed committee chamber, the evidence was placed upon a desk and angled toward a lens. And it became apparent the intuition was not resentment whatsoever. It was recollection. It was recognizing trend. It was you being correct for years while nobody was prepared to articulate it aloud. Currently, an individual has $30 million transformed into $278 million. That was the figure we commenced with. It appeared initially like a narrative regarding a woman who was exceptionally proficient at investing. It never represented that. It represented a narrative regarding a nation where the individuals who formulate the regulations had discovered how to exist outside them, and regarding the morning one of them was demanded on video to justify the discrepancy and failed. That figure will trail her moniker into the historical texts now, not as an accomplishment, but as the proof. If this session held significance for you, if it labeled an emotion you have harbored for an extended period, then deposit a remark featuring the singular term that characterizes how it felt to ultimately observe it, transpire, and forward it to an individual who dedicated years being informed they were fabricating the entire situation.